Okay, let's get started. Everyone, welcome back to Senate Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee work. This morning, we will take up Senate File 2. Old hat for many. Many in the room have been around this issue for a while. Certainly, at least one of our panelists has been around it. And our former chairman of the committee knows all about this bill because it came through the committee during the interim. We wanted to give plenty of attention and time to this one because it's important to a lot of our constituents out across. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. Look forward to just getting after this. So let's get started with Senate File 2, Hunting Licenses Weighted Bonus Points System. This was a bill committee that came out of work 2 and 3 years ago, out of a wildlife task force. You might remember that. We're all veteran enough that we were around at that time. Lots of good work came out of that committee, and some of it passed into law. Some of it is in rules and regs. There's still a couple of these bills around that have been considered for a couple of years. So let's get our Wyoming Game and Fish Department up for any opening remarks that you would like to share with us on this bill, and then we'll get to some task force members. How about that? Oh, you know what? Let's do a roll call while these guys come up. Sorry, Sue, thank you.
I forgot.
Thanks, Madam Chairman.
Somebody reminded me.
Yeah.
Senator Boner.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Jones.
Excused.
Senator Schuler.
Here.
Chairman Landon.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we know you, but please introduce yourselves and your team, Deputy Director. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chairman Landon. Thank you, Chairman Landon. As you mentioned, I'm Deputy Director Doug Brimeyer, and today with me I have our Chief Fiscal Officer is Dirk Miller, and our Chief Game Warden is Dan Smith. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And we'll try and cover some material within the bill and provide maybe some insight from the game and fish standpoint.
So Deputy, I think what might be helpful to me and maybe perhaps to those who might be streaming in this morning, just to kind of back up a little bit and give a perspective of where this has been and why it's here today, that might be helpful if you don't mind.
Sure, Chairman Landon. So as you know, Wyoming's wildlife legacy is really steeped in the participation and opportunity that our publics have with wildlife management. And so we've had 30 years of preference points. When it was initiated, we had a lot of folks that really wanted to have an opportunity to draw. And they wanted a system that if you had loyalty to a particular hunting species, you had a more opportunity to be able to hunt that species. And so 30 years, what we've seen is a growing interest in preference points. Each year, that number of people participating in that continues to grow. And, the opportunity that people have, takes, as I mentioned, 30 years. We've got guys with 30 years of points that are just banking them, not putting in for the draw yet. But we have lots of interest, and the demand for these licenses, it's a limited resource. So for moose, for example, we're issuing about 350 licenses, sheep about 170 licenses. And when you have thousands of people putting in for multiple years, those highly sought after areas for moose, for example, the bighorns, it takes maximum number of points to get an opportunity to hunt. If you're putting in for bighorn sheep, same thing. Some of those highly sought after areas, it'll take 30 years for people to draw or qualify to get a chance to have that license. And if you recall, the current legislation allows for 25% of the licenses to be set aside for random. So there is an opportunity for people to have a random opportunity, but some of these areas have so few licenses that there's not a random opportunity. So with 25% reserved for the random, you got to have at least 4 licenses. So if you start with 10 licenses on a 90-10 split, there's only 1 license that goes to a non-resident, and so there's no random opportunity there. But if you have 40 licenses for one hunt area, 4 of those would be set aside for non-residents, and then 1 of those could be a random. And so with a lot of these species we're managing, it's pretty limited in the opportunity, so the license quotas aren't set very high. So random opportunity is pretty limited for folks. So it comes back to a lot of people want to build their preference points and be able to qualify for draws.
Appreciate that, Deputy Director. That kind of gives us the background I was hoping for. Unless you have other things to share, gentlemen, I might let you sit back for a minute. We reserve the right to ask questions a little bit later, but I'm kind of interested in what the task force is recommending that would change what you just described. So,
Thank you, Chairman Landon.
thank you. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, please come forward. Really appreciate you being here. Please introduce yourselves for the record. Good to see you.
Wonderful. Chairman Landon, Rusty Bell. I was the co-chair for the Wildlife Task Force. Currently, I am now a Game and Fish Commissioner.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Joe Schaefer. My day job, I'm the president of Laramie County Community College, but I'm here in the capacity as a member of the task force.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Gentlemen, take it away. Tell us, remind us of the work of the task force, really. That was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? 3 years ago, maybe? Time flies along, so I don't, yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Bell.
Yeah, Chairman Landon, thank you for that. So the task force was made up of a diverse group of 18 people from across the state, and we spent 18 months on the task force. It wrapped up, I think, around December of 2022. And so we spent the previous 18 months, I think over that time, we had 16 meetings. We spent a lot of time together,
So your COVID time was task force.
it was just really just kind of after COVID, but still kind of dealing with that a little bit. But we managed to do those all in person. We did have some subcommittee work that we also worked on, and this specific topic was really critical for us. We spent, maybe besides landowner tags, we probably spent as much time on this as we did on any single topic. And one of the things that really was maybe missed a little bit, and it was a couple years ago, as you guys are familiar, we passed through the task force, the 90-10 on the Big Five. I think one thing that was not, and you heard a little bit from the department, really one of the intent was for this to happen simultaneously, because what we did do was we eliminated the opportunity for non-residents, for sure, to have an opportunity at a license. When we moved to 90-10 and there's just no random chance, really there's very limited random chance for those folks. And so we run the risk of them, not feeling like they have an opportunity and really not sending in anymore, because it's virtually impossible unless you're already in the queue with 20 to 30 points that you're ever going to even have a chance to do that. So that's one thing I think that we kind of missed and really needs to be cleaned up. But back to what the intent of the task force was to make sure that we were being fair, not just to the folks that have already been putting in forever, but to the folks that aren't even hunters yet. that are going to be hunters when they're, when they turn 14 or they turn 16 and they start putting in, that they have an opportunity to draw a tag at some point of one of those, limited resource animals like sheep and moose. And so that was something that we really weighed. And, we had on our task force, we listened to people that had one preference point, and we listened to people that had 26 preference points. And we really spent a lot of time modeling these things, and I'll let Joe get into that. But it was a fairness issue, and a demand versus resource when we set up preference points in the early 2000s, late 1990s. There was more resource, and now, unfortunately, we have less resource but a higher demand. And so that really was the gist behind putting so much time in this and talking about this so much and modeling this and having LCCC and Joe's amazing staff run a lot of these numbers and decide, how can we do this? We understand, unfortunately, not everybody that wants a tag is going to get a tag. And that's something that is hard to stomach as a hunter, but it's just the truth. There's not enough of the resource for every person that wants to do that, to have that chance. But what we wanted to do is put in a fair system that gives everybody a random chance through a weighted bonus point.
So Chairman Bell, can you help me with the impetus behind, we've been in a preference point system for quite some time. You alluded to an out-of-state hunter having some kind of opportunity. Is that one of the linchpins? What made the task force decide to move in a direction that we needed to change what was up?
I'm going to thank you for that, Chairman Landon. I'm going to defer to Joe on that a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds good. Mr. President, good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I didn't want to cut Commissioner Bell's time off by any means, but I can walk you through some of that to the best of my ability. I've got a simple mind, so I have to organize this stuff in a simple fashion, and I know for many of you, certainly Senator Hicks, this is going to seem very elementary, but it's helpful, I think, in framing the overall orientation of the task force, where we came and why the recommendation is here. And so with your permission, I'll walk through.
These two have seen this, and these two haven't, so we're looking forward to it.
Well,
No, please continue.
yeah, and I believe you have a
President.
copy of the presentation, and I think we can put it up as well and kind of walk through some of the information and try to set the stage to the best of my ability. Yeah, perfect. Mr. Chairman, when we started this conversation, we actually started talking about the big five, and that was sort of the first place where we started recognizing that, one with grizzly bears being one of the big, we're waiting to that date when we actually may be able to pursue and manage those populations as a state. Billy goat and, of course, bison are on a different system, a purely random system. So for today, I'll just talk about the moose and sheep. And generally, when I say moose and sheep, what I'm referring to are type 1 bull moose, type 1 ram sheep. We're not talking necessarily about the female species and management, and we can go into that if you'd like. So why don't you move to the next slide, if you would, Sue? Thank you. So first thing, I want to just set the stage. I think Commissioner Bell did this also. We have to separate the issues of scarcity versus equity. We are not going to solve a scarcity and resource issue with a drawing system. We're simply not. There is no system that will address the scarcity issue. If we want to do that, and the task force believed this pretty strongly, we need to increase populations, especially moose and bighorn sheep in the state. And of course, that can take us into a lot of conversations about predator management, wildlife corridors, crossings, and all that good stuff. But our conversation, for the most part, really focused on finding equitable ways to award permits for a very, very limited resource. As you heard Commissioner Bell say, an increasing demand for a decreasing resource creates an interesting conundrum. But one of the things we recognized early on is that it gets complicated real quickly, and you can go down rabbit holes and get lost in those. And it was hard, I think, at times for us just to stay focused on trying to bring you some solid recommendations. So next slide, please. So quickly, just as an overview of the drawing systems, many people hear the things like points and assume that points are points are points. And they are very different, and states choose to do the drawing systems very different. In my simple mind, there's essentially 4 systems as a way to think about it. The first is a preference point system. It's a system where essentially the permits go to the applicants with the highest number of points. And many of them were originated with the belief that we can eventually guarantee an applicant a permit. And somewhere along the line, I think a lot of people interpret that as a permit when I want the permit and for which unit I want the permit, which has become a challenge with the preference points models. Then there are pure random systems. It's pretty simple. Everybody every year gets put in, and everybody has an equitable shot of drawing those tags. And then what are called weighted random systems. And essentially, it's a random system, but similar, you heard the deputy director say, for individuals that have applied but didn't draw, have a slight benefit in the second year by having a bonus point that essentially gives them a second entry into it. And so it's still random. Anybody can draw at any time, but individuals that have been applying in a system for a while have accumulated the chance to have multiple entries in the hat, if you will. So still random. And then there's a hybrid system, which is generally a mix. And honestly, many states have hybrid systems. Wyoming does. And if you go to the next slide, Sue. I think you know this. Our current system for sheep and for moose, we did move to the 90-10. 90% of the permits go to residents, 10% to non-residents, which aligns with the vast majority of Western states. Right now, 75% of the permits available are awarded in a preference point draw, meaning that those applicants with the highest number of points would get those tags. And then 25% of the permits are awarded in a pure random draw. And as you heard for non-residents, because the numbers are so small, there's very rarely a tag in many units to even be available in the random draw, which means the tags that are there are only for those individuals in the preference point pool. So that's how we function right now. Next slide, please. I've got 2 graphs in here, and I won't go into these, but I do want to just demonstrate, I think, what the deputy director pointed out is that you have a lot of individuals who have accumulated a variety of point numbers for bighorn sheep and for moose. And when you start looking at the totality of some of those, in this case, bighorn sheep, individuals, residents who have applied that have 1 point is 2,400. Every year residents get to compete for 162. And when you start adding that up, there's almost 30,000 applicants with points for sheep who are vying for fewer than 200 permits. And so it just illustrates the demand curve, if you will, for a resource. And the second one, if you go on, Sue, is just moose, and very similar. You can see that there are a variety of applicants with different points stretching all the way out to 30 as well as 1. And that's part of the issue that we're just facing. And honestly, Western states are facing. You have an increasing demand for a decreasing resource, and it makes spreading that resource incredibly challenging. Next slide. So the task force really tackled what I think of as 2 main problems with the current preference point or the current system for moose and sheep. The first was our belief that you could no longer guarantee an applicant a permit in their hunting lifetime, especially for when and where they want to hunt. And that was our first challenge. The other challenge, though, is that people have amassed a significant amount of time, interest, and money into accumulating points. A non-resident that would have 100 and some points or 30 some points, investing $100 per point, significant resource. And so we knew that we had to address the point conversation. I think many of the members of the task force thought if we could start from scratch, would we just start with a pure random system? Probably would, but the reality is you got people with decades of investment in the point system, and that just couldn't be discounted. So on top of solving those 2 problems, the things we agreed with is whatever recommendation we bring forward, we have to consider other things. First, how complex is the system? Complex for the public to understand it, and honestly complex for the department to administer it. What are the impacts of the department in terms of staff resources and perhaps fiscal impact for whatever change we do? What might be the economic impacts for the region, for the state, knowing how much hunting and fishing impacts our tourism industry and contributes there? And then the issues of fairness or equity in debating things like should you give somebody a little leg up if they've applied for multiple years versus somebody in their first year? And so those are the things, as we went through all of this and talked about systems and recommendations, we kept coming back to some of those considerations as we tried to solve those two problems. Next slide. I won't go into the specific statistics here, but one of the things the task force asked us to do at LCCC was try to put some modeling behind it, to help model what draw odds might be under different situations, help model what lifetime probabilities might be for drawing for these tags. We did our best. I don't know that we did everything perfectly in there, but we tried to take different models. What I will tell you is any model is going to give you the outcomes based off of key assumptions. And one of the things that is incredibly difficult is trying to predict what humans will do. As I say, even I believe with sort of the messaging and signaling, the shift to 90-10, the potential for preference point systems going out every year, we have max point holders that do not apply to actually draw a tag. Or they say, I don't want any tag, I only want to hunt sheep in unit 12 and chase those rams up there and to do that. So you would think logically that somebody would cash in when they have the ability to draw a tag, not the case. And there's a bunch of other assumptions, how many new applicants come in? Do applicants withdraw? Do they withdraw at a higher rate or a lower rate to do that? What age do they come in? Do they age out, or how long, what's the hunting lifespan? Is it 65 or is it 70? Is it 75 anymore? And so every modeling that we did, we had to kind of consider that. And depending on how you tweak those assumptions, your modeling slightly changed. So what I'm going to share with you are generally our interpretations and where we kind of landed based off of the models. So next slide, please, Sue. What we modeled, essentially, we tried to look at a few things. First, we said, well, why don't we just phase out preference points? Let's honor the fact that they have them, and let's just quit issuing them, and let's just get everybody through with the preference points. So we modeled that. We modeled shifting the percent allocation. Right now, as I said, 75% to preference, 25% to bonus. What if we went to 50-50 or 25-75? What does that do to change that? We modeled moving into a pure random drawing system. So every year, everybody's in and they just got one shot, and then moving to a weighted bonus point system, which is really what the bill is. And so we tried to model those, and I want to just talk about what we found at the high level, and I'm happy to go into this deeper. So next slide, thank you. So phasing out preference points, again, these are assumptions. If no one moved out, dropped out, or died, which, is probably not the best assumptions, it would have taken the department 90 years to get everybody who had points in there to kind of move through. And again, will people who are 92 be hunting? I don't know, but you'd be surprised at the age of some of the applicants that draw tags every year. So we said, well, what about if they age out? So after the age of 65, how long would it take for us to do that? Let's just think about reality. And we calculated it'd be about 52 years. 32 years, we'd be able to phase out the sheep, and 52 years, we'd phase out moose. And we quickly came to the decision is, even if we wanted to do that, the reality of asking the department to have a system for those that apply now versus phasing them out, too complex, just hard to manage.
By the way, Mr. Schaefer, I hope I'm still optimistic at 90 plus and still trying to draw one. Why not?
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I kept thinking that too. It wasn't that long ago. I thought, I'm not going to hunt after 65. And now I'm thinking, I hope I do for a long time after 65.
By the way, just to interject, and thank you, I don't mean to interrupt for long.
Please.
But, my dad worked for the Game and Fish Department for 41 years and never drew a sheep. So it's not like we're talking about anything new here. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we altered the ratios, and essentially what we found is that no matter what the ratios you push or you alter, you're not really changing the drawing odds significantly. The more you shift to random, not surprisingly, the more likely you are to draw earlier. There was some benefit to that. And interestingly, the more you shift to random, the sheep odds went up and the moose went down, and that was predominantly a function of the numbers of permits. We award more moose permits than we do sheep permits is what we believe. But messing with the ratios, we just didn't see that there was anything compelling to suggest this would make sense for us to completely upset the apple cart to turn where we're at. Next slide. Then we modeled the entirely random system, and the entirely random system certainly had better draw odds early on in applicant's journey, and probably had the highest odds midway through at 20 years, but actually worse as you get to the tail end for somebody that would apply for, for 30 some years in their journey. And the overall lifetime probability in an entirely random system was actually worse than the current preference point system, which was a function of just the numbers, we think. And so then we modeled the weighted random bonus point system, which had the highest lifetime probabilities of drawing a permit, but had the lowest probabilities of drawing in your first year, substantially even less than what you have in the current system. So that was one of the things we had to consider as well, is that you move to this, the idea that 18-year-old in their first year of applying is going to draw is probably the worst of any system. Will it happen every year? You bet it will. And so that is something for us to consider. Next slide. I do want to talk a little bit about points squared because.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
if we can back up to the last slide, Joe, when we looked at that weighted random bonus point system, my recollection is that's if we looked at 100% of the license allocated through that versus a hybrid system where we have a 50-50 is that changes that first applicant's ease of drawing over just a straight 100% license allocated through a weighted bonus point system. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that is correct. Once we started modeling these, we said we're getting rid of the split, the so many in preference. So this was entirely in one random, in this case, a weighted random system. Yep, you're correct.
Yeah, please continue. Mr. Schaefer, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to talk a little bit about points squared because people have asked, what about the weighting? So in a random system, everybody gets in every year. You're all on the same ground. In a bonus point system, every year that you're not successful, you get another entry. And so as you go on, you get another entry. What we recommended was actually a weighted bonus point system or a squared system. And so I tried to visualize that to give you an idea. So under bonus points, you can see applicant A with 1 point gets 1 entry. Applicant M, who has been applying for 13 years, gets 13 entries. And so the actual advantage, if you will, for applicant M is not substantially higher than applicant A in the bonus point system. Is it higher? Yes. Does it benefit? Yes. But you can see that there's not a lot of separation there. The reason many states have gone to the squaring of points is trying to create that separation with the idea, the philosophy that the longer you're in waiting to draw, we want you to exponentially have a greater opportunity. Still random, and I guarantee you every year you have somebody that will draw the tag in their first try, and you'll have somebody at the maximum end of bonus points that will not draw, and it's going to happen. But statistically, the idea is you give that advantage. So you can see in the same scenario when you square the points, applicant A still has 1 entry, but applicant M after 13 years actually has 169 entries, and it's just a way to try to weight more advantage, if you will, to those applicants that have been in there. And that's why states like Montana and Nevada have gone to this, South Dakota, trying to create some greater separation, for people that have been in it for the longest time. So I thought I'd try to visualize that just so it was helpful to see why we wanted to do that. So, next slide, Sue. So a few final thoughts, and then would be happy to stand for questions. The first thing is overall the odds stink. No matter what system you put in place with the few numbers and the high demand, they are not good. The fundamental thing that I think we all landed on from the task force, the best thing we could do is increase the resource. And it's why we supported funding and maximizing the Wildlife Trust Fund. It's why projects like Wildlife Crossings, corridor studies, and managing predators have to be critical for us. We have a wonderfully precious resource that people from Wyoming and people outside of Wyoming want to pursue, but we've got to put more animals on the ground. And this bill isn't going to fix that, but it is something I think the task force said we simply have to address that as a state. Unequivocally, and I think Commissioner Bell and Senator Hicks would agree with that, in our current structure and numbers, there is not a preference point system that will work for non-residents, period. It just won't, as Commissioner Bell said, we were hoping that when 90-10 switched, we would also switch that for non-residents. It's just a fallacy to believe that. And so you'll read many of the magazines and the folks that are talking about hunting in Wyoming, they're basically saying to non-residents, there's absolutely no reason why you would want to buy a preference point in the state right now. So unless you're sitting on max points, it's just not going to work. I do want to say that in the perfect scenario, a preference point system could work for residents. And you may hear some testimony from a very passionate individual that has spent some time modeling this. And in the right scenario, a 16 or 17-year-old who started applying today and applied consistently, if that hunting age is 65 or whatever, based on trends we're seeing and all that, and some of the stabilization of the system, could draw under the preference point system as a resident. And so that is worth considering. I think where the task force landed was a couple of things. The first is we're making it more complex if we ask the department to manage, again, yet another system for non-residents versus residents. And then some of the things are just issues that are completely outside of the control of Wildlife Task Force and TRW. And that's the fact that most youth in Wyoming aren't going to start at 17 and actually apply consistently at 65. You may recall from our wonderful NDOW work, only 40% of our 18-year-olds are still in the state 10 years later. So the likelihood that somebody would have that continuity. And then the other piece with it is it doesn't change the fact that individuals that are here that start applying later in their life will not have that probability. And so I believe I had my first preference point 13 years ago. I was age 37. I now have 13 of those. So yes, I am getting old and thinking about that. But the reality is we've got wonderful people that come to the state. I like to think I've added some good and to the state along the way, who hopefully will want to pursue these as well. And because we have so many individuals that start well beyond their youth, the reality is they just won't have the chance in a preference point system to drawing. And so could the system work in the right situation? Yes. Are there compelling instances of where we still want to consider the drawbacks of that? I think the task force and I would certainly land there as well. And then the last piece I'll just say is that there are some applicants in no man's land. And I think we saw some of this from some of your colleagues in previous sessions on the House side. If you're sitting on 18 sheep points right now, we're recommending, I think, a 5-year phase-in still to allow, and I'll talk about that in a second. There are some folks that theoretically could apply or could draw in the preference points model in their hunting lifespan if they're at that higher end, but not at the max. I'm close. I'm sure there's people in the room. So we recognize that, and there are ways you could consider. I think some of the members of the House tried to tinker with that to figure out what do you do with these folks. Ultimately, at the end, the task force said that there's just going to be some people that are going to have to work through that. And so I do want to make it clear that there are some folks in those 15 to 18 points that theoretically could benefit from the current system, and so may be impacted by the shift, even with a delayed implementation. And so, last slide, Sue, please. So just as our overview, how we got to our recommendation, the task force believed that we cannot guarantee everyone will eventually get a permit, and this is especially true for non-residents. We looked at and believe phasing out takes too long and required decades of monitoring of two systems for the department. We recognize that people have preference points that they purchase, and points are a significant source of revenue to the Game and Fish, so we didn't want to just throw those out. We believe that using weighted bonus points has the highest lifetime probabilities of drawing, but each year everyone still has a chance. So it works with that. And then we also believe that delaying implementation provides the highest preference points holders the time to draw under that system. And we looked at 5 years. Given 5 years in sheep and moose, those individuals with the highest points, if they chose to apply and draw a permit, could do that over the next 5 years. And so the delayed implementation was an opportunity for us to recognize those highest preference point holders. It would probably be worth asking the department to look at that and see, because I do think that there has been individuals who have been reading the writing on the wall who have been applying. So maybe it doesn't take 5 years still to implement this. Maybe that could be reduced since we are 2 years past the recommendation, but that would be worth considering. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, happy to do my best to answer any questions and look forward to your work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Questions, committee, of either of these gentlemen? So I'm sure the task force, in fact, I listened in a lot back then. You know, a lot of talk about discouragements and things. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Schaefer or Chairman Bell, regarding, you know, you don't want to just turn people away from this sportsman world, and our Game and Fish needs the support. Did you guys talk very much about that? You want a system that people at least feel like not giving up. I mean, we want our hunters to support our Game and Fish, and we want them to have a chance. Does this bill still give them a chance, and do we keep our young people applying?
Chairman Landon, that's a great question. We had a lot of talk about that. And really what this bill does is actually moves into a system that everybody does have a chance. I mean, a weighted bonus point system is a random system. And so it does allow for a chance for everybody. It also gives those non-residents a chance every year. Like Joe said, certainly somebody's going to draw on their first year, even though the probability is really low, and somebody's not going to draw when they have a lot of chances in there. That's just the way it works. But at least they have a chance, where we have a system right now that there really is no chance. And you know, some of our areas where we're giving out 20 or 30 tags, and some areas we're giving out 1 or 2. A big difference between how those, you know, your chances in those. This is actually going to go to a system that everybody would have a chance. So,
Okay, thank you.
I think one other thing, Chairman Landon, on this, and you'll probably get this from the department when you go through some of the changes, but I just wanted to let the committee know that it wasn't the intent of the task force for the cow ewe tags to be once in a lifetime. And I think that it's important for you to know where the task force sat on that, because I think the language in the bill right now isn't the case. So I just want to make sure you understand that too. So
Yeah, thank you for that heads up. Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairman, either one of you or both of you want to weigh in on this on the phase-in timeframe, but I think Dr. Schaefer, you highlighted one of the reasons we looked at that phase-in is based on, you know, where some natural breaks and the number of the applicant pool has. But I don't think a lot of people understand, and I want you to opine on this, is there is a number of people that already can draw. And so you take that, I mean, I went through the data this weekend. If you're a resident and you had 20 points, you could have drawn potentially in 5 or 6 different areas for sheep. They chose not to, even though they've got 28. That's a personal choice. And sometimes a lot of the, you know, public comment we get is I've got all these points and, you know, I don't want to lose those. But the choice is you get to go sheep hunting, or you get to just hold out until you get your one special permit. And there's some, I would say, resistance that changes the system, but I would curious as if you guys would opine on that, and it gets back to where that phase-in period is. There's plenty of opportunity for those maximum point holders to draw those permits right now.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yeah, very, very good point. And that's one of the challenges here. When you model a lot of these statistics, it's again based off of what we think people will or won't do. So there are folks theoretically that when we looked at it for sheep, it was 18 points was kind of that trigger. But even for moose was 15 points, if I remember, where in certain years, people with 15 points for a certain unit could be in the preference point pool. But that could change substantially. We saw this in sheep in the last couple of draws, units where people, you know, said, of course, I'm going to draw this with 21 points. Demand creeped up in there, and they were no longer in the preference point pool. And so knowing that there are opportunities in any given year for people at various points makes sense. The challenge is that people have their own preference and make their own choices with that. And I think that's one of the things we grappled with. As I said, you know, early on, we believe that a preference point system would allow somebody to decide when they were going to draw, where they wanted to draw, and all that stuff. And that's just not the reality anymore. But there are opportunities. And when we looked at it, there were some breaks around, and you could see it in the graphs with the top, 6 or 7 different point holder groups that we felt in 5 years with the current allocation we'd work through. But then after that, the numbers start to jump up exponentially, and it would just end up, you end up having to add another 5 years to get through the next group, and then another 10 years, and then we're into the phase out period. And so there are opportunities, but as Senator Hicks said, we can see it in the data. Even those that kind of know this, the writing's on the wall, had opportunities and chose not to apply for units that they could draw. And that's a personal choice, but I don't think we design a system for those exceptions. We have to design it for the entire population.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Chairman Landon, Senator Hicks,
Bill.
we really put that phase-in time in there to just have those people make that decision, whether they really want to draw a tag or they just want to wait and try to get one of those 2 tags that are in a certain area. And it just gives them the time to make that decision. That really was it. That goes back to a little bit of a fairness thing. Those folks that have those highest preference points, give them an opportunity that if they want to draw, they can draw. They want to, if they really want to go sheep or moose hunting, they can do it. And it gives them a 4 or 5 year window to make that decision. I think looking through this bill too, had a lot of conversation. We went through this with the department last week, and it also gives us a 4 or 5 year window to make sure that all this language that ties to a lot of other things is perfect. So I'm making a little light of that, but this is a very complex, and it touches a lot of different statutes and things like that. So as the department and LSO go through to clean something like this up, if it should go forward, making sure that there's not something in there that we didn't look at. So but really for the task force, it was about giving those folks an opportunity to draw.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Go ahead. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the implementation. I know you mentioned, since we're a couple of years past when Wildlife Task Force got going on this, would you guys recommend or anticipate maybe changing that, maybe 5 years to 3 years, or would you stay at 5 years again, hoping that maybe we'd still, be able to catch some of those older gentlemen and ladies that might be on the top of the scale?
Chairman Landon, Senator Schuler, that's a good question. I think when we first came out with this in the first bill, it was 2027 implementation, and now I think it's 2029. Is that correct? I think that was still our intent, is to make sure that we give those folks that 4 or 5 year window to, if this passes, they know they have 4 or 5 years to make those plans, and they have those points. They can get that license, and I think it's still important. I really do. I think those folks that have been sending in for 3 decades and have those points, we're going to give them that opportunity to say, yeah, we do want to harvest a sheep, and we're going to go in an area that we know we can get a license, and so it'll help those folks, and it's a fairness thing. So I think it still is, that phase-in period is important. Appreciate that question.
Gentlemen, I appreciate it. I would like maybe the department to come back up just for any questions, or maybe to kind of outline exactly what the bill does, and appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Back to the department to maybe walk us through exactly what this bill does. And Deputy Director, I want to make sure, my questions center around the department and the ability to lift this. Is it reasonable? Is it something that can be accomplished without too many hiccups? Take it away, Deputy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman Landon, and again, appreciate being here and being able to go through this. So really, the department has been working through this bill and looking at different aspects of it. So, and I'll try and touch on a few bullet points that we feel would help address things. But from a fiscal standpoint, revenue impacts, we're kind of struggling with that right now because it can't really be calculated given the changes that occur. And if non-residents start to perceive that they don't have that opportunity, that could change. And so we don't expect at this point in the near future any kind of significant decreases or increase for our revenue, because we think that bonus points, if this passes, would offset those reductions. There's also going to be a continued attrition for some of the long-term preference point applicants, as Joe Schaefer presented, that there's some of those folks with a high number of points that have not been putting in because of that personal choice. There may also be an increase in the bonus point applicants due to that perception that they have that opportunity. So again, that's why it's difficult for us to kind of determine from a fiscal standpoint what it does to our revenue. If cow, calf, moose licenses are addressed, as Commissioner Rusty Bell mentioned, that will continue to have people putting in for cow and moose. Right now, there's about 110 people that put in for, after they've drawn the once-in-a-lifetime antlered moose, they're putting back in after their 5-year, they're putting back in to try and get an opportunity for a cow moose. So we see an interest in that. Some of the impacts we will see with the agency are increased programming, testing, and implementation. There's a lot of work that goes in from our IT standpoint to develop programming. We have quite a complex system. Other states, use contractors. We have a staff that work on that. So there would be some added level of work on our side to make sure that the system would work right. We'd also expect that we'll see a lot of publics calling our office to get an understanding of what actually happened. So we anticipate that'll be one thing. Some examples of just how licenses have been issued. I think, as we mentioned, there was 256 RAM licenses in 2010. In 2024, we issued 172. So that limited resource there is just going to continue to be there in the background that we need to look at when we have those applicants applying. Another example is just with the moose. With moose, there was 397 licenses issued in 2010. Last year, there was 280. And again, that increase in limited supply. The recommendation, that the task force has had some pretty significant public opportunity to comment on. We also followed up with a survey, and 60% of our respondents supported doing something to make sure that they had an opportunity to, draw and have an opportunity to hunt in the future. And 60% of those respondents were in favor of that bonus point conversion. If implementation was delayed until 2029, there would provide some of that transition for the long-term applicants. We think that would be a benefit for those folks. And it also will give our staff and our commission time to ensure that bonus point system would work for us. We would continue to use the statutes. I think that the current bill would need to be aligned better with the current statutes that are in place, in terms of the 90-10 and the antlered moose and the ram licenses. And so I think, as Commissioner Bell mentioned, the cow-calf moose license holders currently, the way the bill is worded, those folks would fall into that once in a lifetime, and we need to make sure that is modified so that those people can continue to draw or have an opportunity to put in. Last year, we had preference point holders with 25 points putting in for cow hunting in the Bighorns. And if you look down through the department's website where the preference point demand index is, it shows that people with 17 to 20 plus points are putting in just to have an opportunity to cow hunt. And so we'd like to see some opportunity to be maintained for those people to continue to do that. So right now, the ewe lamb licenses are totally random, but antlerless moose are, they fall under the statute where it just says moose licenses.
So Deputy Director, is there a spot in the bill specifically that you would point to that you'd like us to take a look on that cow-calf issue? When I read through, I thought, page 6 we've referenced, but
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Mr. Smith.
maybe I'm reading it wrong, but on page 6, line 7, where the words were inserted, cow-calf or ewe lamb licenses, it appears in that section that that would then make those once in a lifetime. I think the intent there was to say antlered moose or ram sheep would continue to be once in a lifetime if they were in that waiting period.
So, thank you for that, Mr. Smith. Committee, do you have your arms around that? Are you, go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Page 6, line 7.
Page 6, line 7.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it's where the words were inserted, cow or calf, and the other words inserted were a ewe or lamb. But if I read that in the context of the sentence, it appears that that makes them, if they were on that 5-year waiting period, that would make them exempt from applying again. I think the intent was antlered or ram, if they were in that 5-year waiting period, would exclude them from applying again. But I may be incorrect.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
part of the work from the task force, we already did pass a statute that says antlered moose and ram bighorn sheep are once in a lifetime. And so, because that provision is separate, I don't know, I think this deals with the 5-year waiting period for the cow calf, or let's say the cow calf or the ewe lamb, is if you draw one of those, you have to wait another 5 years before you can apply. But I want to read through that section. But we already have distinguished the once in a lifetime component for those antlered moose. And so I just need to read through this to see if it does limit that. My first cut is it doesn't, it just deals with the 5-year waiting period. Because we got rid of the 5-year waiting period for antlered moose and bighorn sheep. They are once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Well,
I just need to read through this.
you know, I appreciate you guys bringing that up. I think that we'll try to drill down and cover that as we work the bill, maybe. I don't see the need. I'm not sure why we did that in the language, because I don't, Mr. Smith, you're not concerned that somebody would be able to draw the very next year for a cow moose, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I don't think it says that.
Yeah.
There was just some confusion in that language. It is tied in, like Senator Hicks said, with the once in a lifetime for the antlered moose. And then it addressed the waiting period for cow-calf moose. But the language was a little bit confusing right there. And I think with Senator Hicks reviewing that, that'll clear that up.
Yeah, we need to clean it up.
Yeah, we'll work on that, gentlemen. Deputy, thanks for letting us interrupt there for a minute. I didn't want to miss understanding exactly where we were going with that. Please continue.
Yes, I think the other point that.
Mr. Chairman?
I apologize.
And while
Senator
we're on
Hicks, go
that,
ahead.
I want to capture something that the deputy director that you said. And so you said you want to make sure that we still have that option for those preference point holders for moose to use those for the non-antlered cow-calf tags. Reviewing the sheep data, even those U tags are overprescribed under the random draw. And just to implement some consistency, would we not want to allocate some of those towards my guess is there's a number of people with points that would be more than happy to apply for those, because some areas are significantly overprescribed in a random draw. And I was just curious as to your thoughts on affording that opportunity, similar to what this bill contemplates, maybe a 50-50, 50% of those, let's say, antlered or non-antlered cow-calf moose, ewe lambs would go into a preference or weighted bonus point system, 50% under the status quo. And what that does is makes uniformity across all the species in the statute. But I'm just curious if that's something you guys have contemplated based on what you've testified with the cow moose, if it's something, your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Deputy, go ahead.
Chairman Landon and Senator Hicks. And I think from my standpoint, as somebody that hasn't drawn a U tag yet and has put in, I think there's some validity to having that discussion and seeing what our public would like to have with that in a regulation. As you mentioned, there's a pretty high demand for them. It's just the opportunity to get out in the fall and pursue, bighorn sheep. So yes, I think it'd be worth having that discussion, and we'd probably talk a little bit more internally about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good caution, Deputy Director. I think that might be a good move. Whether we want to tie it in and try to rope that one in this effort, we might want to be careful just to try to get this through. But we can talk about that as a committee. And so, Deputy Director, please finish your comments on this bill. We appreciate you. Thanks for letting us interrupt.
Thank you, Chairman Landon. And I think really the only other thing I wanted to mention, I guess, was that with 50% of the licenses being issued in a weighted bonus point, and then 50% as written in the bill, that would bump up the opportunity for some of those people just starting off. Because right now with it at 25%, like I mentioned earlier, under the 90-10 bill, there's got to be a pretty good bunch of, you got to reach a certain point of allocation of licenses before there's an opportunity for non-residents to hunt. And so that'll just elevate that for those people and give them a perception that there will be some opportunity there. And I think really that's all I had to cover within the talking points for the agency.
Yeah. So Deputy Director, good point made there at the end, and that goes back to the concern I raised a little bit earlier today, which is, any system that we look at, anything we try to do, you want to try to hang on to your younger hunters. They're the ones that are going to be supporting our game and fish long after we're gone. And so I think about that a lot and I worry about it. Our sportsmen are carrying a pretty big load right now, and we appreciate them an awful lot and just want them engaged and want them to keep doing that, so.
Yes.
Committee,
Add one
go
last-
ahead, Deputy
Chairman
Director.
Landon.
Yeah.
So the last thing I just mentioned is that our staff is available to work through the bill with LSO if they would like to take a look, and Senator Hicks as well. If there's some points that we want to make consistent with other statutes, we're willing to give you our thoughts.
Well, we're fortunate to have the senator having served on that task force and very engaged on this front. And if we want to take off after that committee, we can certainly work this as it goes through the process. If it goes upstairs, we can work it along the way. So appreciate having one of our commissioners here to help guide us, and the good doctor. That was great to have the president here to walk us through it. So any other questions? Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we may have asked this question before, but just to refresh my mind or memory, if you could, how difficult is it going to be for your department, if this goes through, to be able to deal with all the administrative parts of it? We have to have another, hire someone else to help out in that situation, or update, computers, your software programs, or I don't know, anything you could let us know about that.
How big is the call bank going to be?
Yes, Chairman Landon and Senator Schuler, we kind of anticipate that we will have a pretty good influx of calls, and we're staffed to try and address that now. Our IT folks, we have priorities within the agency, and given the date of 2029 to implement this, I think we would be able to in-house, be able to work on this and get things in place adequately. And that'll give us time too, as people start calling and asking questions. And we always staff a little heavier during those peak times, the end of October, when preference points need to be drawn or need to be applied for. And then, of course, in January 1 through May, our phone folks are just, they're pretty busy. But we think we can handle it.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Anything else, committee? Thank you, department. Appreciate you guys. We're going to go to some public comment on this bill. Would welcome any public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to visit with us about Senate File 2? Well, we've got another commissioner in the room. It's always good to have commissioners.
The other flavor of commissioners. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Bill Novotny here on behalf of the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association. And unfortunately, our position hasn't changed from 2023 when we opposed this. We are somewhat married to the system, and as we continue to try to provide quality experiences for our outdoor guests. And you'll remember that non-resident hunters are responsible for over 80% of the budget of the Wyoming Game and Fish. We think it's critical that we give them opportunities. We would strongly discourage you from looking at changing that implementation date if you do move this bill forward. You know, we've already got those folks that are out there in preference point purgatory, and we don't want you to pull the rug out any further. So by moving that up, you would limit some more people that could potentially move out of the system. And our biggest concern is actually not the sheep hunters. It's a bunch of the moose hunters that have been trying for 30 years to hunt in the Pinedale area. There's a couple of outfitters over there that specialize in moose, and that's one of the areas that they try to hunt in. So I'm not going to beleaguer this valuable time of this wonderful committee, but we still remain opposed to this bill, and we would just discourage you from moving that date from 2029 to 2027. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Novotny, thank you. So what are your thoughts on young hunters as they come into, you know, our sons and daughters and granddaughters want to start hunting at 10, 12, 14 years old? It just feels like the system today, boy, it's a long ways off for them to have a shot. But what do you think about some of the things on the younger hunters?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I look at this particularly bonus points with rose-colored glasses because as a 16-year-old hunter, I was able to draw a bighorn sheep tag in Area 5. Now I have not been able to draw since, and I'm slowly building my points back up. I think we
You
need
drew a
to,
sheep at 16 years old?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it did, and I don't know what we've got going on upstairs or if that's the voice of God.
They might have let a moose in here.
Or maybe a bison, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
I think we have to remember that it's not only recruitment, but it's also retention. Because when you do think of those hunters that are at the top line of those preference points, they are the ones that have supported the department through these years, through these difficult times, providing the money that has covered our litigation over wolves and grizzlies, paid for the research because they have been the ones that are providing that additional resource. So yes, it's an imperfect system on how we create more opportunities. In the perfect world, we would put all of our focus into increased opportunities, which comes through having more wildlife, whether that's through predator control, habitat improvement, reduction of crashes, which cause death of wildlife. That's where my focus would be, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Novotny. Any questions for the outfitters and guides? Appreciate
Mr. Chairman.
being here.
I was-
Thank you. Thank you very much. Further public testimony. Anybody in the room want to come up and visit with us about Senate File 2? Anybody else? Sue, do we have anybody streaming in today that wants to?
Mr. Chairman, no Zoom participants today.
Nobody
on Senate
online
File
on
2.
this one? Okay. I'm going to close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
Move the bill.
Okay, the bill's been moved. Discussion. Any discussion? Senator Boner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the testimony here today. I am concerned that this changes up things a little bit too much, and I'll be voting no, but looking forward to the discussion probably on the floor. See how this moves forward. So.
Go ahead, Senator Schuler. Thank you, Senator Boner.
Sorry, I've got a little frog in my throat, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we had a lot of discussion on it. The work the Wildlife Task Force did, I think, was, you know, amazing. They spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and to me, you know, I think with the five-year implementation, you know, I did hear from a few folks that were a little disgruntled, but I also heard from a few folks that thought this was going to be awesome. And I think it was mainly the younger hunters that thought, well, gosh, there might be a chance, you know, in my short lifetime to be able to draw. So I think that's the thing that kind of tips me in the favor of this bill more than anything else, is that we do want to encourage our young people to stay in the state. We want to encourage them to enjoy our wildlife and our out of doors and recreate here. And I think this system that I think is pretty amazing. And I did look at some other states too, to see what they're doing. And when this came through the first time around, and I think it's genius actually. And I understand the folks on the other end of the deal, but I think 5 years, it appeared as though we could get most of the older folks that have been putting in for many, many years. That 5-year implementation, I think would take care of a good share of them. And so I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, Senator. You know, committee, I've thought a lot about this bill since we got down here. Really appreciate the work of the interim committee. Chairman Schuler is one of our best and really guided this through the interim. I also grew up in an area of the world where we had a lot of visitors that came to our state to hunt. As I mentioned, my dad's a game and fish guy, and I was lucky enough to grow up in Sublette County and know the Western Wyoming mountains pretty well. My mom's family is DuBois country, so I know the bighorn sheep pretty well too. And by the way, I worry about that herd up there. There's just so many things that come into play on this bill. But given the fact, committee, that we have one of our committee members gone today who went through the interim and supported this legislation, I don't know if I'll get there with this bill, even though I appreciate very much the work of the task force, the work of our department. I'm going to continue to listen and learn and watch the amendments. But today I'll probably, in fact, I will be in favor of the bill to keep it moving so that we can continue to work it, continue to look at maybe some amendments that might help. So I'll be an eye on the bill. Anything else? Any further discussion? Senator Hicks, anything?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just going back through this section here, and I do think it makes those permits once in a lifetime. And so I'll offer an amendment, which is basically to strike the new language and reinsert the old. It says one thing and does both. And so
Are you,
it's inconsistent. So on
are you
that page.
talking on page 6,
Yeah.
Senator?
Yeah.
And that was a motion?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so it would be on page 6, line 6 and 7 would be to strike all new language and reinsert all the old language. And I think that gets back, that excludes those so it's taken care of in the section above because it restricts those antlered and the grizzly bears and all that to once in a lifetime. And then it's silent on that issue of the 5-year waiting period. And I think that would accomplish what the department's pointed out.
Sue, are you following the amendment?
Yes, I have it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, any discussion on the proposed amendment? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator Hicks, are you saying that do we need to add antlered moose or a ram, or just leave it as moose
So,
or bighorn sheep?
so.
Go ahead, Senator.
If you go up there, that's already taken care of when we get up there and you go to start at line 2. So after July 1st, 2022, Grizzly Bear Mountain goes, any moose or antler moose or any ram bighorn sheep, any bighorn sheep and any wild bison. Those, you bring that language down, those are all once in a lifetime. And so then we get into, is subject to the 5-year restriction under this section. If we just reinstate all that language, I think it deals with the issue that those still follow under. If you go back over to the front page on page 5, here's where this comes in. It says, no person may apply for and receive more than one cow, calf, moose, or ewe lamb in any 5-year. And so that language makes it, I think, much clearer. So
You don't need that.
we don't need it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think, appreciate it, Senator. You ready for the question on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Okay, that amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. Anything further, committee, on this bill? Okay, Sue, would you take roll on Senate File 2?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 2. Senator Boner? No. Senator Hicks?
Aye.
Senator Jones?
Excused?
Senator Schuler?
Aye.
Chairman Landon?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 ayes, 1 no, 1 excused.
Okay, committee, Senate File 2 will go to the Senate for consideration, and as I mentioned, I'm not sure where I'll be by the time we get done with the processes upstairs, but I look forward to the debate and the work on the bill, and again, I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, everyone. We will be back in at noon today, committee, and we will take up Senate File 3. That's the bill talking about our deer populations in Wyoming. And so we look forward to that. We'll be right back in this room at noon. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming